Hello Nigel, thank you for taking some time out, and it's been a few years since I last saw you.
Yes, I think we were thinking 1994, maybe 1993, around about that window.
Yeah.
It's been a long time.
So let's go back to some of those OMD years, and did you co-write Walking on the Milky Way?
Yes indeed, yes indeed.
What?
Really interesting, it was a really interesting period of time, because I think we finished touring in South Africa. And at the time I was living quite close to the Pink Museum. I was living just off the roads where the studio is. And I just happened to go into the studio one day when Andy was in there working. And we were just talking about stuff. I went into the control room and that track was on. And we just started doing some bits and pieces around it. And then before you know it, yeah, that's what came of it, Walking on the Milky Way.
Some poignant lyrics on that song.
Yeah, it's interesting for me because in particular the way how the song starts off. You know, when I was only 17, you know, it pretty much talks a little bit about what my life story has kind of been about, really, and I would say in particular that period of time, you know, between being 17 and joining OMD. And then the life experiences that I had during that period of time is definitely very interesting for me. Yeah.
So let's go back to the age of 17. You were took part in a TV contest on the Saturday Superstore.
Yeah.
Was it Juvenile Jazz?
The Juvenile Jazz.
Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, in a nutshell, I was the school I was going to, which was St. Margaret's at the time. I used to spend I was a bit of a music nerd. I've always been a music nerd, really. So I used to spend a lot of time in the lunch hours playing piano in the hall, and a lot of kids would come in actually and do things, you know, ask me if you would play things like Aha and, you know, stuff like that, just pop tunes at the time. I play music by ear, so it means that I could listen to songs and play them really easily. And as a result of that, I ended up hooking up with some of the guys there. We started busking, actually. We used to busk in Liverpool city centre. And then sometimes we'd go over to places like Chester, sometimes Manchester as well, and busk. And then whilst we were out there, at one point busking, someone came to us and said, you know, there's this music competition on called Saturday Superstore, Search for a Star. We think you guys would be good for that. So we ended up having, you know, a go. We got through the auditions, and then before you knew it, we won it, which was absolutely amazing, actually. I won't lie to you, that was a brilliant success, especially at that age as well. Yeah.
And did you expect to win?
As we got a little bit closer towards the tail end of the competition, I think it became apparent that, you know, we really had a strong chance of winning, purely and simply because what we were doing at the time was actually quite unique, in the sense that we were playing Dixieland jazz, we were playing Dixieland jazz popular tunes, you know, like King of the Swingers, things from the Jungle Book and stuff along those lines. And also, from a musical perspective, we actually were really very good. You know, for the age that we were, we used to play alongside, you know, people like Akka Bilk and Kenny Ball, and you know, who are proper Dixieland jazz, you know, guys. So to have that level of credibility as musicians, age 17, meant that, you know, we were a little bit, you know, kind of special. But obviously, when you're in a music competition, sometimes it's not just about your musical ability, it's about how you look, how you portray yourself. So we had to do a little bit of work on that. But yeah, it was a great success, definitely.
Did you actually record an album later that year?
Yeah, we did. We did an album. Where that album is, I couldn't tell you. But I do remember us making an album, which was a great experience for us as well, as a group as well, to capture, you know, some of the musical moments that we shared as a unit. Because obviously, you know, when you're playing live, and especially with jazz, it's improvisation, so it changes, it's moving all the time, but to capture it on record was actually really good.
That's brilliant. And did you actually have a spell with hot chocolate at some stage?
I did, yes. Now that actually occurred after I was in OMD, so it occurred in between the Sugar Tax and the Liberator album,
right.
Actually, yeah. So I was, obviously, during kind of like downtime, I still maintained connections with a lot of the guys that I did session work with, and he was going out on tour, and I think it was, I can't remember, it was a theatre tour he was doing, and I got the opportunity to play keyboards with him, that was a brilliant experience.
What were the live concerts like?
The live concerts were great. One of the things that I would really, I'm going to say, attribute to a guy like Errol Brown in particular, was the fact that he was a real gentleman. You know, he was a very cool guy, and he also was one of the first people I'd say I met in the music industry who, how can I describe it? He was paternal. I'd say that's the best way to describe it. Yeah. So he asked about, you know, what you were doing, what you saw your career path as going, and he was also the very first person that talked to me about music publishing and about the fact that he thought it. You know, one of the things he said to me was, you know, as good as a keyboard player as you are, you know, if you do want to have longevity, Nige, it'd be great if you got into writing and things along those lines, and maybe establishing a publishing house and seeing if you can get songs placed. I'd never had that type of conversation with, you know, someone, you know, in the music industry in that type of educational career path type way. So that was very, very good, because I think in some ways I attribute, you know, me co-writing Walking on the Milky Way a little bit to him, because he opened my eyes to the possibility of that, and saying that was a good idea to do something along those lines. Yeah.
And coming back to OMD, how did that OMD thing
come about?
Happen? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, basically, prior to me being in OMD, I was playing for a rapper at the time called the Rebel MC, and he'd had some, you know, great chart success, and I literally, we were in London shooting some videos with him. And if I'm honest with you, I've never been a massive fan of like being in London on downtime. It's not really my favourite city as such. So I don't mind going in and coming out, but staying there for long periods of time was never me. So we had this small window of time in between. I think it was doing a video and doing something else, and I decided to come back to Liverpool for that little window of time. And back in the day, one of the things I'd say about the music community, or the way that it was then, you tended to gather a lot around music shops. So at the time you had Rushworth's Music House, which was in the centre of Liverpool, and then you also had Hessie's, which was across the road. And, you know, you'd go into those shops and you knew the guys behind the counter and all of that type of stuff. So whenever I was back in Liverpool, one of the first places I would go to would be the music store, just to touch base with your mates and things along those lines. And I can remember going into Rushworth's, and one of the guys there saying to me, "Oh, you know, you're back. How long are you back for?" And I said, "Oh, you know, just a couple of days." And he said, "Oh, there was a guy in here looking for you." And it was the guy who, at the time, was the owner of the Pink Museum, and he was aware, through Andy recording there, that Andy was looking for a band to get to go on tour. So he gave me that guy's telephone number. I got in touch with him. I went, met Andy. We sat down and talked, and, you know, it just developed from there. Yeah.
So back then you were formed a sort of band with Abe and Phil Coxon.
Yes, indeed.
And then obviously later it was Stuart Kershaw
Yes,
came along,
indeed,
but Abe went out.
Yeah.
What was it like for you to actually sort of learn this OMD new material?
Well, it was okay.
And back catalogue.
And back catalogue. Well, songs like Talking Loud and Clear and Locomotion are songs that I already kind of like had in my psyche. I knew those songs. I didn't necessarily know Enola Gay and songs like that as well, even though I'd heard them. They weren't, maybe melodically, I'd say probably things like Talking Loud and Clear probably, you know, resonated more with me in terms of my memory and where I was coming from musically. But I grew up obviously playing jazz and playing gospel, and when you are playing jazz and gospel, you know, it's complicated, and, you know, it's all about improvisation and things along those lines. Whereas OMD's music is very disciplined. You know, the format and the structures are very clear. There isn't room as such for improvisation, but at the same time, that kind of makes it easy, because you know, once you know that that's the melody and that's where it goes, you're just learning that something specific. so that was it was interesting pulling that together in terms of the learning of the songs. I'd say the greater challenge wasn't actually really learning the songs in terms of their melodic form of structure. That was probably more so pulling the sounds together. You know, things that had been, you know, created on old synths, and then having to recreate those things using, you know, Korgs and Akais and sampling emulators and stuff along those lines. That side of it was perhaps more intense than actually learning the songs, and also deciding, you know, what elements would run from a track, which parts would be split in, you know, which keyboard player would play which parts, you know, that type of stuff. So that was some of the detail that, you know, that really went into that, which was really good.
Going on tour, I mean, as you now know, has been a band member in OMD. You know, for the fans, the tour has always had energy and electricity. And you certainly made a stamp on things. You had your own. What was it like to go on tour with OMD? Because you did, you know, South Africa, America. You went all over the world.
Yeah. It was brilliant. First and foremost, it was brilliant to see the, you know, just the, I'm going to call it the human reaction to what those sounds mean, if that makes sense. Yeah. You know, when you're playing Joan of Arc, or, you know, Maid of Orleans, you know, and those songs, or an Enola Gay, and, you know, nothing really prepares you for the audience, you know, response to doing that. Nothing prepares you at all for that, really. You know, you can do that in a rehearsal room, and you know the songs are important. You know they were hits. But even I'd go beyond saying the fact that even they're hits. I think there's a bit of a deeper connection there with that material, people's lives and their stories at the time. So you know, to receive that appreciation back, and obviously I wasn't the author of, you know, those melodies and those arrangements and stuff like that, but even still, to be able to play them and to, you know, to see the impact that has had, that's pretty unique as stuff goes, definitely.
And you were quite a young man, relatively speaking.
Yeah. I mean, I was 21 when I joined the band, and I definitely think it was when I say it was the right thing for me to experience, the way that I grew up in music and what I love about music, I don't think I would ever have been pigeonholed into being like a session player for, you know, he plays for this band, then he played for that one, and it's all in either R&B or it's in soul or along those types of lines. So for me to be that character in that window of time, I think was perfect, because I was able to, yes, play the structured, you know, melodies and the things that are a part of what makes OMD, but I think at the same time I was also able to bring just who Nigel is, and, you know, definitely who I was at that time, which was a bit more about, I guess, audience engagement and getting people to wave their hands, and, you know, being able to play, like, you know, a mobile keyboard and playing those melodies on things like that. That to me was a different thing to bring, which is probably more of an essence of me at the time, definitely.
I did an interview with Stu Kershaw, and we were talking about sort of memories and things, and he was telling me a lot of memories from the South Africa experience. Well, do you have any special tour memories? Yeah,
I definitely, the South African tour was, it's very hard to, just kind of describe that, because it for me it was, and I think for the rest of the guys in the band as well, it was more than just a tour. It was kind of what was happening in the climate politically at the time as well. You know, bands are families, yeah, and you know, every family has its own, you know, set of troubles, it has its own psychosis, everything that's going on with it. And so by the time we'd by the time we got to doing that tour, you know, as a band family, we were dealing with our own life circumstances within the context of the band, but then also knowing the importance of being able to go there and achieve that, and, you know, to do that justice as well. So that was really big. You know, it definitely wasn't just we're going over there just to play some tunes and come home. It was definitely much bigger than that. In particular, being over there, big memory for me, being over there was definitely the time that we spent on safari, the Shamwari Game Reserve. I'll never forget that as long as I live. You know, that was a real, you know, that was a very deep experience, I think. In terms of the gigs that we played there, all of them were brilliant. We did a gig on this place called Plettenberg Bay, which was absolutely amazing. And then we did 2 nights in this in an arena in Johannesburg, which you know, there's some videos of online of that particular night, and you know, whether or not it's my own children now or people who have seen that, they always point to that there's a point in us doing Talking Loud and Clear where the lights go up on the crowd, and you know, it just, you know, that's what I call, you know, seminal moments in doing things that, you know, absolutely amazing. I remember that, and that's mind-blowing as an experience. But one of the things that we did do, or 2 other things actually that we did do that I think were mind-blowing for me, was a run of gigs that we did in what at the time was, I think it was called the Hammersmith. Was it Hammersmith Odeon or Hammersmith? You know, but we were there for like, I think we were there for a week. And again, when you're living life, sometimes you don't necessarily appreciate the significance of the fact that, wow, we are actually doing a residency in this particular place and we're here for a week. That was absolutely amazing as well. But I think with that experience and the South Africa experience, the other thing that rates really big in my memory in terms of my introduction to OMD, but you know, just the vastness of what can be achieved musically, was the tour that we did with Simple Minds. That arena tour was absolutely, you know, that was mind-boggling. You know, Jim Kerr, those guys, you know, you know, okay, we're OMD, we've got our melodies, those guys have got their melodies. That was an amazing period of time. And the other one that really sticks out for me in terms of its just sheer vastness was a concert that we did in Germany, which was us, Duran were there, I think ZZ Top were there, and Prince, and being stood at the side of the stage and seeing him do his thing. You know, you can't forget things like that, really. You know, it's groundbreaking stuff. And obviously you're living life at the time, going through your own stuff, but hey, it's still absolutely amazing. Won't forget.
I can remember coming to see it very late, early hours in the morning at the Pink Museum, and you sort of at one stage seemed to be living in the Pink.
Oh man, there was a period of time there. You know what's really fascinating about that now, and I talk to my children quite a bit about this, is the fact that, you know, in order to create a piece of music, obviously you might buy bits and pieces of equipment to try and have a home studio, but 9 times out of 10 you were trying to get money together to go into a recording studio to do stuff there. And you know, the equivalent now, you know, of what it cost to make a demo that you had to live there for 4 days to get right, that basically is the equivalent of a MacBook Pro now. And in lots of ways, I really enjoy and value technology for what it brings, and the ease of which, you know, we've got recording studios on our phones now. We can literally do anything, broadcast to the world instantly what's going on. But I think what is different about that period of time and now is, in those days you had to fight. Yeah, if you wanted to achieve something, you really had to set your mind to it. You had to try and figure out where the resources were going to come from, even just to get a demo together. And I think that that's one of the big changes now. In lots of ways, it's almost become kind of like, well, you know, I've got a MacBook Pro, and if I'm not a star within the next 6 weeks, I'm going to be really upset and take my toys home. It doesn't work that way. Do you know what I mean? So we spent a lot of time in the Pink Museum. It was it was a place where I learnt about record production, how to make records, and how to just really how to create, layer things, put them together to make something sound, make it sound good. Yeah.
Okay, and just coming on to another phase of your life, we had the first rising of the Stone Roses, and yes. you were part of that?
Yeah, well, what happened, again, a really interesting story. I can remember the owner of the Pink Museum, I can remember him needing to go over to Manchester. There was a place over there that did a lot of studio. I think it was called Studio. It could have been called Studio Spares or something along those lines. I can't remember the name. And on that day, I think I was just driving, and we picked some guys up, and I can remember this conversation in the back of the car, which was about the Stone Roses and what was going on with them, and yeah, they're trying to get things together, and I can just remember hearing the conversation going on in the back of the car and thinking, oh, it's interesting. And literally about 4 or 5 weeks later, I got asked to do a bit of work with them on a remix of one of the songs, which was called Begging You. And I went over to the studio to do that. I did a few days, and then the band had to go on tour to America. So they went on tour to America. I remember coming back to Liverpool, and then whilst they were away, John Squire broke his collarbone, and so they had to come home off tour, and they ended up going back into a residential studio, which is across the bridge in Wales, called Mono Valley, and they asked whether or not I would come down and start doing some work in that vein. So I was in the studio, and whilst they were there, because obviously with John breaking his collarbone, it meant that they had to cancel playing Glastonbury, and they had all of these gigs that were up and coming, and there was no kind of prep as what's going to happen. So we started rehearsing, but rehearsing without him, and I can remember filling in on different parts and playing keyboards, playing guitar, swapping between, and to be honest with you, I didn't even really know. I had to learn their back catalogue pretty quickly, and then John came down to the studio, and it's a weird thing. There wasn't any kind of formal. Nothing with the Roses was ever very structured and formal, but it was kind of like, I guess you're coming on tour with us then, and that was that. We did the Fela Festival over in Ireland, which was brilliant as the first one, and then we did Pilton, which is the kind of post-Glastonbury thing, which was amazingly brilliant. And then I'll never forget this as an experience. We had to do this. I think it was called the Lollipop Festival in Sweden or somewhere like that. And I can remember being at that festival. We did the sound check, and I left the sound check and decided to come round to the front. And I was just walking through this field. And as I was walking through the field, I just heard someone say, "Nigel, is that you?" And I looked, and it was Morel. And I said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm with the Roses." And she said, "What? Like you just here like with mates?" And I said, "No, I'm actually playing." It's like, oh my gosh! So yeah, that started its own cycle of of let's call it madness. Yeah.
I was very fortunate to actually come and see you in the Roses playing, and come backstage, and I think it's safe to say it really was rock and roll.
It was rock and roll. Around that period of time, I can remember obviously Oasis were making their kind of breakthrough as well, and let's just call it rock and roll. It's rock and roll as you dream it, and all the stories that you hear about what rock and roll is supposed to be. That was the Stone Roses in a nutshell. Absolutely amazing, mind-boggling. Would never want to do anything like that again.
So here we are, 2017, and I find you living in Bristol of all places.
Living in Bristol,
And you settled down here?
Yes.
How did this come about?
Well, it's interesting. Okay, so when I was a kid, I had relatives that lived in Bristol. So my mum used to send me down here on like school holidays and things like that. We come down for Easter, summer holidays, and my auntie, who we used to stay with, her husband, he looked after a church down here. He was a pastor of a church. So when we were down here with them, we used to visit or come to church with them. So as a result of attending church and stuff with them, I met the lady who is now my wife. So I've known my wife since I was about 13 or 14. And when I was in 1995, a friend of ours was getting married, and I can remember coming down to the wedding and bumping into my wife at that wedding and talking to her, and it was great just to see her again. And I can remember on the day needing to leave to head back to Liverpool quickly, and for years and years and years I couldn't understand. I knew I had to go back to Liverpool, and I knew it was Andy's party. It was a party for Andy that I was attending. It was in a Mexican in Liverpool, and for years and years and years I couldn't understand why I had to leave the wedding to go back to Andy's party. However, with that brilliant invention called Facebook, one day about 4 or 5 years ago, the person whose wedding I was at on that day, it popped up to say it was her wedding anniversary, as Facebook does those alerts. But I noticed on other people's feeds that they were saying happy birthday to Andy. So I only made the join as to why I had to go back to Liverpool on that day, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, because I had to go back to Liverpool for Andy's birthday party. And so anyway, we met one another again. I waited about a year to meet her again. By that point, I was fully in the Stone Roses then, and I literally knew that I needed to exit that world and burn it all down basically and start all over again. And I went after we did Reading Festival. So Reading Festival was August the 25th, 1996. After that was over, I left Bristol to go to I left Reading. I can remember coming to Bristol, going back up to Liverpool, literally getting rid of all of my stuff and going to America. I was in America just following my nose for about 2 or 3 months. In those days, you wrote letters to your girlfriend. There wasn't a read receipt on Facebook. So I followed my nose, and then eventually I came back home. I decided to settle in Bristol. We got married in 1998. I had our first daughter in 1999. We've got 4 children now. So that's been absolutely amazing journey. I tell you, one of the most amazing parts of that journey in terms of its connection with rock and roll was I got 4 children, 3 girls, 1 boy, and I can remember going into the hospital on the day when he was due to be born, and we went in there on the 24th of August. And I can remember being in there like from about 9 o'clock in the morning. We were there all day, and it was just really long. She was in tons of agony. And then around about 9:30 or so in the evening, I kind of remembered that my last gig with the Stone Roses was the 25th of August 1996. So I turned to my wife and said, I'm sorry, love. You've got at least a good 3 hours to go yet because he's not going to turn up until then. And sure as about 12 into the 25th, he was born.
That's a bit of a coincidence.
Just a little bit. But I've had quite a few of those along the journey, so it's been good.
You involved, is it sort of UK churches on the IT web side? What's your involvement with that?
Well, basically, when I left the music industry and I moved to Bristol, okay, but one of the things about music, and you learn this as a musician when you're growing, you know, sometimes economics can be boom and bust. And one of the things that I was really fed up with was boom and bust economics. You know, the periods where you're doing really successful, you've got loads of money, and then there's other periods of time where you didn't. And I didn't like that. I knew that I didn't want to get a job or as such. And I knew that I wanted to work for myself. I knew that I wanted to be involved in music and stuff like that. But I just knew that I knew that I wanted to do things on my own terms. And so I think around about 1999, 2000, I decided to invest what I had in, you know, just a little company called Music and Message. It was called Music and Message at the time. And the idea behind that company was that I was going to make music for people that needed, you know, music on hold on the telephones. So that's why it was called Music and Message. So music, I'll provide the music, we'll record the voiceover. You've got the message, away it goes. But what I needed at the time, obviously, to promote this as a business was a website. So I didn't have one at the time. So my cousin actually recommended a guy, you know, who he said, you know, he'll be able to do that for you. And so this guy did the website. People saw the website that he'd done for me, and then said, you know, would it be possible to get another one of those? So at the time he was doing a media course in university, and he did a few of those, and then the company started to expand a bit. So I said to him, you know, maybe it would be a good idea if, you know, you provided website development, you know, we could get more people to do things along those lines. I will be able to, you know, expand it and get it to reach people. And one of the people that asked about getting a website done was a church. And so we did that one, and then another person asked from a different church, another person asked from, I think we got to about 5 that where churches had asked for it through word of mouth. But what I didn't like was the fact that, you know, on a website at the bottom you have the credit. Mm. And I didn't like the fact that the credit was Music and Message. Because I thought, why would Music and Message design a website for a church? So I started thinking about that loads. And then I kind of thought to myself, well, wow, obviously if those churches need that, there must be loads of other churches that need that as well. So I decided to change the name of the company at the time from Music and Message to UK Churches, and to narrow or basically just niche market web development to churches, but to do it in a subscription pay-as-you-go type model. And that started in 2001, and 16 odd years later, it's going very strong.
Still going.
Yeah.
I often watch some of your messages on Facebook.
Yeah.
And you're very mature and grown up now, and a bit of a philosopher even.
Well, it's okay. I think the best way to describe it is like this. Okay, I grew up in a Christian household. Yeah, my grandfather was a minister. So I grew up in church. I grew up in faith. But what's the best way of me describing this? I grew up in church. I grew up in faith, but I'm not religious. Yeah. I think religion divides more people than it unites. I think people on a general scale do have a connection to faith or a belief in something bigger. But I think what religion tries to do is to narrow people down to, well, it must be this, and if you're going to believe, it must be through these channels. I don't agree with that. And also, I've seen the world, I've lived life, I know what it is to have a lot, I know what it is to have nothing, and so you tend to grow then with a bit of compassion and learning how to meet people where they are. And, you know, not to put too fine a point on it, by the time I'd finished in the Stone Roses, my life was a wreck, do you know what I mean, as a human being, and how I felt, you know, you know, I would class my mental state, my emotional state. You know, the music industry had led me around pretty much by the nose, and what I wanted more for myself was peace. I wanted self-determination. I wanted to be able to wake up in the morning and know what I was doing for myself and be clear about that. I also wanted to, rid myself from my dependency on drugs, and these are all, you know, big life-changing things that I wanted to do. But what I will say is that the process of me doing that didn't start with me having like, oh my gosh, I now must turn to God. It just wasn't like that. If I'm 100% honest with you, you know, we're here in the centre of Bristol now. The flat that I was living at in the time is just around the corner from here. And I literally used to wake up in the morning, and there was a channel, I don't know if you remember at the time, called Granada Plus.
Yeah. And
on Granada Plus at the time, they would play back-to-back 70s like cop shows. MacGyver, The A-Team, Charlie's Angels, The $6 Million Man, you know. So for where I was at the time, coming off touring, being in one place for a long period of time, you know, I was learning just how to be just a normal kind of human being. And so I used to watch those shows. And in particular, you know, like with the $6 Million Man, there was this line in it at the beginning where they would say, "We can rebuild him." And I took that line very personally, because of the fact that I'd been through all of those experiences, and I did feel like I was broken, and I did feel like I could rebuild my life, and I didn't have all of the tools to be able to do it, but I knew that it was possible. And, you know, if you look at programs like all of those programs, MacGyver, The A-Team, Charlie's Angels, $6 Million Man, all of those shows all have an underpinning theme, which is good overcoming evil. You know, you will succeed in the end. It's kind of written into the story. What's it called? You know, the A-Team would be locked in a room, and they'd have like a bit of masking tape, a pin, you know what I mean, a Coke, a can of Coke, and, you know, a hairdryer. And then it would go to a commercial break, and then come back, and then da-da-da-da, and they'd burst out of the thing, and yay, they'd won. So that was where I started my, if you were to call it, mental turnaround. Was watching programs like that and thinking, no man, Nigel, you can do this, man. You just need to think. You need to just concentrate, focus your mind. And so I started making changes there, and then eventually I started to feel comfortable then with the concept of faith and God. Because for a lot of people, God and faith is attached to guilt and condemnation. And so if you've been a relatively good lad, and then you joined a rock band, and before you know it now you're smoking weed and you're taking cocaine and your life's gone downhill, the concept of God and guilt is kind of like, well, I don't need that pressure in my life. So I dealt with it on A-Team, $6 Million Man level. You know, we can rebuild him. And then eventually I started to realize that there was an underpinning belief system within me, which was faith, which is attached to God and good overcoming evil and your ability to empower your fellow man. So I just started documenting that, and I became my own experiment, if that makes sense. So the things that people see now that I do on Facebook, and the way that it led me to do bigger things, or it led me into churches and other places, was because people wanted to know how did you go from being that guy who was in that band, experienced that, had the dips of that, into being the person that you've created now and what you're working on now and what your belief system is now. So, you know, I never set out to be a minister or anything along those types of lines. If I'm 100% honest with you, even the church community that I look after now as a pastor, I'm not a career minister, so I'm not even looking for, right, I'm going to go on to be in that church and then I'll be in another one, and then before you know it, he's got a 10,000 strong mega church. That's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in one-to-one relationships, helping people, empowering them. So, you know, that's the way how that kind of really came about. I experimented on myself. I managed to turn life around through the practices in business learning. You know, 17 years building a business, you learn a lot of stuff in that type of time. And also having 4 children, you can't get better project management training than having 4 kids. You know what I mean? So that type of stuff has really helped to, you know, I'd say shape who I am now really more than anything else.
If you had a chance and somebody came knocking on your door, would you go back to Stone Roses or to OMD?
Okay, if you're talking if you were making a choice between the two, I think the let's call it the largesse of the Stone Roses and the, you know, that kind of cool kudos type thing attached to it probably makes that the more obvious choice. Yeah, I'd say that for most people would be the surface choice. Yeah, but if I was making the choice between those, it would be OMD every time. And I think that's because of I'll never ever lose the raw, I'd say, heart-based connection. I'm going to say primarily to Andy, because, you know, what a lot of people won't necessarily understand is, you know, where he was in life at the time, where I joined the band, and, you know, he'd been through a kind of band breakup and things like that himself with the old band, and where he was, and, you know, that whole, you know, when you're fighting to make something win, you know, and what he was going through in terms of the energy behind Sugar Tax and needing that to be a success, and then you join in with that, and then, right, where are we going to get the keyboards from? How are we going to get those, you know, that type of stuff now is almost, you can almost snap your fingers, someone does it or whatever it is, but there was fight attached to that, there was hunger, and, you know, there's process attached to it. It wasn't just, boom, we're here. So for me, and where I was in life at that time, making those choices over again, you know, every time, you know, it would be OMD absolutely every time. I understand the fact that on a surface level, you know, and the whole thing, it's the Roses, you know, it's the legends of whatever. And I get that, yeah, but no.
Isn't it strange that the Roses have now got their second rising?
Yeah, but in a way, you know, it's funny because I don't even, I value, do you know something? I'm still friends with Morel now. You know, those guys, they've been over to my church, as an example. You know, they've seen me doing my thing in lots of different spheres. I attach a greater level of significance to the, you know, the success of OMD now having an album out in this era. There's one particular, I don't know this young lady personally. Yeah, I've become connected to her through Facebook. She's friend requested me. Her name's Imogen. Yeah,
young lady.
A young lady, yeah. And I think my ability for where I am in life now, knowing what I experienced through OMD, coming through the other side of that, 20 years now, living a different form of life, still knowing the guys, still watching that process unfold, seeing someone like that have that level of devotion to the band now, and then the band have what I would consider to be genuine, authentic album success. Yeah, as in, you know, the discipline that, you know, look, I think it's a foregone conclusion. I tell you what, guys, we're going to reform and we're going to do a gig in Heaton Park. But of course, everyone's going to go nuts. And wow, it's the Roses, oh my God, da da da. But we still are really only talking about, what, 2 albums? Mm-hmm. Yeah? So, I get it. And I get it on a surface level. I get the kudos level. I get the cool. I get the swagger. You know, I get that, yeah? But, you know, what does it take? What does it really take to have, like, well, you know, it was 1979, and then it was 1980, da da da, and then it was and then it was da da da, and then we did that again there, and then we did that again there, and then it was 1991, and it was 1993, and then we just, and you know, I think that takes a different level of discipline.
We're going through a very strange period at the moment where you've got the millennials.
Yes.
Which are relating to the 80s music.
Yes.
Maybe a bit like you related to the 60s.
Yes, of course. Yes.
You know, you've got all these young people,
yeah.
you know, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, all going, wow.
Wow. Yeah.
It's what my mum and dad listened to.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. And I'm experiencing the same thing with my children, in terms of the way that they, you know, one of the strangest things, you know, will be, you know, to hear your own children finding the music that you played for themselves. Not you coming along and saying, you should listen to this because Daddy was on it. It's them coming to me and saying, how did you feel when you were playing X? And they've discovered that for themselves. And but also not just discovering it, but discovering it and appreciating it in its genuine, you know, authentic, you know, sense. For me, that's absolutely amazing. But that's again one of the reasons why I think, yes, I definitely do have a more emotive heart connection to OMD. But I think if you look at it statistically, in terms of the consistency of creation over decades, you have to just kind of go, well, you know, you have to give it to those guys. You know.
And does Nigel have any plans for the future?
From a musical perspective?
From life.
Okay, from a life perspective. So from where I am right now, one of the biggest keys for me is, okay, so I've built UK churches, that's still growing. I do a lot of coaching and mentoring and going into organizations and, you know, speaking to organizations about organizational change, which, if I'm honest with you, is really based on my life story. You know, it's basically rock and roll to redemption. That is it, really. Obviously, I've ended up doing the majority of that within, you know, the Christian framework, within a church framework, which has been great. And I love the idea of doing that, and it's opened a lot of doors for me. Like, say, for example, I've got a daily radio program now on Premier Radio, which is on from 1 till 2, all really, really good. But I feel that in some ways, to access that message, you know, sometimes the gateways to being able to access it means that a person has got to go to a church, or they've got to become a Christian, or something along those types of lines. And for me, that gateway is too narrow. So I launched my own website, nigelipinson-fleming.com, probably about a year ago, with a view to taking the type of stuff that you're seeing me say on Facebook or Instagram and stuff like that, and move that now more in the direction of going into places and doing seminars that are let's call it religious based. It's just based around life principles that anybody can apply, and if they put their mind to it and work hard, and then if I can coach them and work alongside them, then that can work. So one of the key things I'm going to do there is I'm going to be setting up a website soon called Lunchtime Talks, and with that, what I'm literally planning to do is just go into companies during the lunch hour, and maybe go into their boardroom, and their staff can come in. They can have a half an hour talk with a 15-minute Q&A, then go back to work, and in that way, then you're sharing your story. You're going out to meet people. One of the biggest problems with religion in general is that it wants people to come to it, as opposed to going to meet people where they are. So for me, part of the next level of what I do is going out, to do that. On a musical level, I've set up Garage Gospel as one of the key vehicles through which I go out and do gospel choir workshops and things along those lines. And I plan to do an album of that material. I did an album of that probably about 6-7 years ago. There is a part in me that probably will not rest until, in my own space and in my own time, I have the opportunity to sit down and listen to, like, I know this might sound like a weird thing to people, but one of the things on my to-do list is to sit down and listen to absolutely every single piece of music that OMD ever released, and basically do like some kind of like piano based compilation album of the best of what hits my heart, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it could be really good.
Yeah.
It's quite funny with inspirational speaking, because it's quite in vogue at the moment as well, isn't it?
Well, what I find fascinating about it is the fact that it wasn't a career-based thing for me. It happened to me because I was the client, if that makes sense. I was my own case study. I knew that where I wasn't good. I wanted to change. I didn't know any other way to do that was to kind of get my house in order mentally and start from ground zero. So I started off talking to myself, and then I started to change. Then started to say to me, "Why don't you come and come to tell us about how you did X, Y, Z?" So that's kind of like how it's happened, really. Yeah.
Is there a final message you would like to give people that are watching this?
Well, one of the things that I've never ever got to do, and Imogen can actually, she can bear me witness to this, because I felt it was important. I actually sent her a message directly on Facebook to thank her for her support of the band. Even though I'm not involved in the band now myself, I don't think I will ever get away from feeling like that's my band, as it were. And so I felt like thanking her was an important thing to do. But definitely, number one, Andy giving me the opportunity. Relationships are amazing things. Let's put it this way: if I can have the types of fights that I have with my own kids now, which when your kid is like in your arms this big, and you take them out of the hospital and they're just looking at you like, you never think that there's going to be a day when your own daughter's going to be like, "Don't talk to me like that." But it happens, doesn't it? It's real life. So, in a similar type of way, when you go into close proximity relationship with people, obviously you want it to be just amazing and smooth sailing, it's all flowers, but that life isn't like that. But Andy, I will always appreciate for giving me the opportunity to be able to be that guy in OMD, which I believe I owned that space and made it my own. So that, I'm definitely very grateful for that. I'm very grateful for walking on the Milky Way, because for me, walking on the Milky Way, and that kind of establishes my own creative link with the band, you know, for all time. So for me, that's very important. But definitely as well to all of the, you know, the fans, you know, you can't, you know, I can't begin to articulate, you know, what appreciation looks like as far as the fans are concerned. You know, the guys at the time who we reference as the Barmy Army, you know, that as an experience, you know, you can't, these are things that are never erased. So I'm always permanently grateful for that as an experience. And if there's one message I would leave with everybody, which I would say has become my kind of mantra, is the fact that if you can change your mind, yeah, you can definitely change your life. I am living proof of that, yeah. And it's made me very happy. The things that I measure success by now are perhaps different to what I measured them before, but I still have an appreciation of music success, what that looks like, which is why I really am, you know, when I look on Facebook now and see like the band are doing a live thing in America and they're doing brand new material, however many years, you know, we're talking 20 plus years down the road since I was in the band. Oh, come on, that's, you know.
Are you going to see them in a few weeks in Bristol?
Of course, mate.
Of
course. That's like going to Mecca. Whenever the band comes here, I remember the first time that they came. So when this time will be the third time that I've seen the band since not being in the band. The first time, oh my God, that was just, it was ridiculously emotional. And it was also the first time that I'd, you know, seen and spoken to Andy properly, you know, since us being in the band and stuff like that. So that was, the first time was, I would class that more as a healing type experience. The second time, that was just like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm in the Colston Hall. I've got it on camera somewhere. I'm in the Colston Hall and there are like 3,500 people singing Walking on the Milky Way, and I'm there with my phone, and just like, I mean, come on, you know what I mean? So that was just like beyond, I felt like that was a bit like redemption. That's what redemption feels like. On this occasion, this occasion is going to be this one's going to be a little bit different, and I think that's because I'll probably be studying it more. I'll probably be attending this one a bit more on the muso. So let me hear this new music. What did they really, you know, where did that go? How did they come up with that? Why did they come up with that? It'll be a little bit more intelligent, but I'll have people around me who will be just like, oh, you know what I mean? That type of thing. So it'll be a different experience, I'm sure. But
Nigel, I'm sure you're going to enjoy the concert.
Oh yeah.
And I'd like to give you a massive thank you for taking the time out of a very busy schedule.
No worries.
And
absolutely.
to wish you luck for the future.
Thank you so much.
To say how well you are looking.
Oh, good, mate. That's good. Not too bad, yeah? Not too bad. 20 years plus, you know. Not too bad for 47.
Nigel Ipinson, thank you very much.
No worries at all. Awesome. Awesome.